I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis, in a two-story house with a white picket fence and a tire swing that barely held together. It looked picture perfect from the outside, but if you stepped inside, you'd quickly realize something was off. I was the younger daughter, Elizabeth, and my older sister, Vanessa, was the golden girl. From the moment we were kids, everyone in the family seemed to revolve around her. She was louder, prettier, more confident. At every school play or recital, our parents would cheer for her like she was the star, even when I was on stage. But back then, I didn't question it. I figured maybe that's just how older siblings were. I tried not to take up too much space, thinking if I stayed quiet and did everything right, someone would eventually notice me. What I didn't realize until much later was that I was being slowly erased, not just emotionally, but literally. One summer, when I was 8, we took a big family trip to Lake Superior. Everyone was there: Mom, Dad, Vanessa, even Grandma and Grandpa. We took dozens of photos. I remember posing next to Vanessa on a cliffside, wind in our hair, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Years later, I found the same photo in my parents' living room, but in the framed version, it was just Vanessa. I was cropped out. I stared at it for a long time. My mom noticed and said, "Oh, we didn't have a frame that fit the whole picture. Don't take it personally." So I didn't. I swallowed it, just like I always did. But it happened again. And again. At birthdays, at Thanksgiving, at family reunions. In every major event, I was either cut out of the group shots or placed so far to the side it was easy to pretend I was never there. Looking back, I see how deliberate it was, but as a kid, I thought maybe I just wasn't photogenic enough. Maybe I blinked too much. Or my smile was awkward. I kept finding reasons to justify being invisible. Vanessa, on the other hand, always knew how to take up space. She had a way of drawing attention, of making every conversation about her. I tried to be like her once, but the more I tried, the more I felt like a cheap imitation of someone the world already adored. I learned early that in our family, there wasn't room for two stars. So I stayed quiet, I stayed small, I stayed in the background, both in real life and in every photo we ever took. I thought I was being too sensitive until I found the truth. As I got older, I convinced myself that maybe I was just imagining things. I told myself that every family had favorites, that it wasn't personal, and that maybe if I worked hard enough, I could earn my place. I studied like crazy in high school, took every AP class I could, and got into a good college out of state. Meanwhile, Vanessa stayed home, never finished community college, and drifted from one retail job to the next. Still, every time I came home for the holidays, my parents bragged about her as if she had invented electricity. "She's just trying to find herself," Mom would say. "Not everyone's path is straight." And I got it, I really did. Life is messy. But what I couldn't understand was why my achievements were always brushed aside like they barely mattered. Then came the moment I couldn't unsee. I was home for spring break during my junior year in college. Mom had just put together a new photo wall in the hallway. A walk through memory lane, she called it. I walked down that hall slowly, scanning the frames. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach vacations. Vanessa was in every single photo, smiling, front and center. And me? I was in maybe 3. In 2 of them I was turned away. In the third, my face had been awkwardly covered by glare from the glass. I asked Mom, "Didn't we take a ton of pictures during those beach trips?" She didn't even look up. "Oh, sure, but most of them didn't come out right. Bad lighting, blurry, you know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I waited until she left the house, then went to the old storage bin in the basement, the one labeled family photos. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor, flipping through hundreds of prints. There I was, in picture after picture. Not blurry, not in the background, just not chosen. They had picked the photos where I wasn't in the frame, or cropped me out, or simply ignored the ones where I was smiling, present, alive. It wasn't bad lighting. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a choice. And it broke something in me. For years, I'd carried this quiet ache, thinking maybe I was too dramatic, too sensitive, too needy. But holding those discarded memories in my hands, I realized something much deeper. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me. And somehow, knowing that hurt even more, the birthday party that broke my heart. It was Vanessa's 30th birthday and she went all out. She rented a private room at an upscale restaurant in downtown Minneapolis, invited about 50 guests, family, friends, coworkers, and had a professional photographer for the night. I showed up in a blue dress I'd saved up for, holding a carefully chosen gift. Despite everything, I still wanted to believe we could have a normal sisterly moment. Maybe she'd hug me. Maybe we'd take a photo together, and it would finally feel real. When I walked in, she barely acknowledged me, just a quick nod before she turned back to her friends. I found a spot at a side table, far from the center where Vanessa sat like a queen. All night, people toasted her. There were slideshows, speeches, old stories. Our parents laughed louder than anyone else. At one point, the photographer made rounds, snapping candid shots, posing people in groups. He passed my table, camera ready, then hesitated. Vanessa waved him off, saying, "No, not this table. Get more shots of the other side." I smiled like it didn't matter, but it did. Later that week, the photos were uploaded to an online album, dozens of pictures, all bright and joyful. Vanessa with her friends, Vanessa with our cousins, Vanessa with our parents. Not one photo of me, not even in the background. I scrolled slower and slower, trying to find just one glimpse of myself to prove I hadn't imagined being there. Nothing. I finally messaged Vanessa. "Hey, I didn't see any photos with me in them. Did the photographer miss my table?" She read it and didn't reply for 3 days. Then she wrote back, "It's my party. Don't make this about you." That line shattered something in me, because it wasn't about the photos. It was about what they represented. That no matter what I did, how hard I tried to be there, to be part of something, I was always going to be the one edited out. I thought about all the moments I had swallowed, all the times I convinced myself I was imagining it. The truth was, I wasn't imagining anything. Vanessa didn't forget me. She excluded me. On purpose. And worse, my parents let her. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, makeup still on, dress wrinkled from sitting in the corner all night. I stared at my reflection and asked myself a question I had never dared to say out loud. Why am I trying so hard to belong to a family that keeps erasing me? From heartbreak to awakening, I began to see things clearly. After that party, I started looking at everything differently, not just the photos, but the patterns. The way I was always seated at the edge of the table. The way my news, new job, new apartment, a promotion, was met with polite nods, then quickly overshadowed by something Vanessa had done, even if it was just adopting a cat or changing her hair color. It wasn't just exclusion, it was intentional erasure. I remember once getting a feature in a regional magazine for my nonprofit work. I brought a copy home, excited to show my parents. My dad flipped through it absent-mindedly, muttered, "Nice," then turned to the TV. Vanessa looked over my shoulder and said, "Wow, they must have been short on content this month." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting, but deep down, I was bleeding. And the worst part? I still kept showing up, every holiday, every birthday, every awkward dinner, hoping something would change, that someone would say, "We're proud of you, Elizabeth," that I'd feel wanted. But those words never came. What did come were more slights, quiet, cutting, perfectly disguised as harmless. Vanessa once joked at Thanksgiving, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Remember when Elizabeth tried to give a toast? God, it was like watching paint dry." Everyone laughed, even my mom. I smiled too, because what else was I supposed to do? That moment stayed with me, not because it hurt more than the others, but because I saw something in my mom's eyes when she laughed discomfort. Like maybe, for a second, she knew it went too far. It was the first crack in the wall. So I started paying attention, really paying attention. And I realized my family had built a version of me that made it easier for them to dismiss me. The too sensitive one, the quiet one, the one who always makes a big deal out of nothing. But I wasn't any of those things. I was just someone who wanted to matter, to be seen, to be included without having to fight for it. It was the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet, but it felt like a shift. A small, slow awakening inside me. And once I started waking up, I couldn't go back to sleep. I finally spoke up and watched everything unravel. After that Thanksgiving, something inside me shifted. I didn't want to keep pretending anymore. I was tired of playing the role they had written for me, the quiet one, the afterthought, the background character. So I wrote an email. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just honest. I told my parents and Vanessa how I felt. I wrote about the photos, the comments, the years of quiet exclusion. I said I wasn't writing for an apology. I just needed them to understand what it's been like to feel invisible in your own family. I hit send and sat there, heart pounding, staring at the screen. No reply for 2 days. Then Vanessa responded, short and sharp. "You've always been too sensitive. Stop trying to make yourself the victim." That one sentence confirmed everything I feared. My parents never replied. Not even a call, not even a "let's talk about this." The silence was louder than any words could have been. At first, I felt like I had made a mistake, like I had broken something that couldn't be fixed. But over time, something strange happened. I started to feel free. There's a clarity that comes when you stop begging people to see you. I stopped going home for holidays. I spent Christmas with friends in Chicago. I hosted a Friendsgiving that felt warmer than any Thanksgiving I'd ever known. No fake smiles, no quiet tears in the guest room. Just laughter, real conversation, and people who made space for me without me having to shrink. That winter, I started therapy. My therapist asked me, what would it look like if you stopped trying to earn love from people who only give it conditionally? I didn't know how to answer her, but the question stuck with me. So I started small. I unfollowed Vanessa on social media. I stopped sending birthday cards. I stopped reaching out, just to get silence in return. And I started showing up for myself. I applied for a leadership position at work. I started painting again. I signed up for a community art show, terrified no one would come. But people came. Not my family, but friends, co-workers, my neighbor from across the hall. And when I stood in that little gallery, surrounded by people who saw me, who chose to be there, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Healing didn't look like what I expected, but it changed everything. I used to think healing would feel like closure, like getting answers, like one day my family would come around and finally see me for who I am. But that's not what happened. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic reconciliations, just space. Quiet, painful space where their absence echoed louder than their presence ever did. And yet, in that space, I started to grow. I began rebuilding my life in ways I never imagined. I stopped trying to fit into rooms where I was never welcome. I stopped showing up where I wasn't seen. And most importantly, I stopped chasing love that came with strings attached. I made peace with the fact that my family wasn't going to change. Vanessa would continue living in her curated world where she was always the center. My parents would keep orbiting around her like she was the sun. But I didn't have to keep standing in the cold. I moved into a small apartment in the northeast side of Chicago. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls soft yellow. I filled the space with plants, thrifted furniture, and photos. Real ones. Me with my friends. Me laughing. Me painting. Me just being me. For once, the walls reflected my life, not the version someone else wanted to present. I also joined a local women's group, other women who'd been through similar things. Sisters who weren't seen, daughters who were dismissed, wives, mothers, and friends who had to fight just to be acknowledged. And in their stories, I heard echoes of my own. We weren't broken. We weren't dramatic. We were simply done being erased. That spring, I hosted my first art exhibit, this time entirely my own. It was in a rented studio space, nothing glamorous. I called it Uncropped. Every piece was about presence, about taking up space, about reclaiming yourself in a world that keeps trying to trim you down. People came, strangers, friends, co-workers. One woman cried in front of a piece I made of a faceless girl surrounded by empty frames. She said, "This feels like my entire childhood." And I nodded, because it was mine too. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't need my family's validation to exist. I was no longer that girl begging to be seen. I had learned how to see myself. And for the first time, that was more than enough. A letter with no reply, but I didn't need one. A few months after my art exhibit, spring had settled in. Everything felt softer somehow. The air, the mornings, even my thoughts. That's when I decided to write one final letter. Not to fix things, not to open old wounds, just to let go. I sat down with a pen and paper. Something real, something that couldn't be screenshotted or ignored with a quick tap. And I wrote to Vanessa. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, that I had spent years trying to be part of something that never had room for me, that I no longer needed to be in her photos, her stories, or her spotlight. I told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. And then I wrote to my parents, a separate letter. I told them I loved them, that I understood their choices, even if I didn't agree with them. I didn't ask them to change. I just asked them to remember me. Truthfully, not as the background character, not as the difficult one, but as their daughter, who only ever wanted to be seen. I sealed both letters, added stamps, and dropped them in the mailbox outside the corner coffee shop. No hesitation, no expectations. And then, nothing. No text, no call, no reply. Days turned into weeks. Silence filled the space again. But this time, it felt different. Because this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I was waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. One Sunday morning, I walked to the lake near my apartment. The sun was out, glinting off the water like glitter. Families passed by, laughing. A little girl ran ahead of her mother, arms wide like wings. And I just sat there, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the world go on. It struck me then, not as sadness, but as clarity. I had been chasing a seat at their table for so long that I never realized I could build my own. A table where no one had to fight to be included, where every chair came with dignity, where stories weren't rewritten to erase people, but told, fully and honestly. That letter was never about a reply. It was about releasing the weight I'd been carrying for years. And in that quiet, I found peace. I put myself back in the frame, this time, on my own terms. A year after I sent those letters, I opened my own photography studio. It wasn't fancy, just a converted storefront on a quiet block with creaky floorboards and good natural light. But it was mine. I called it Frame and Light. People came, new mothers wanting photos of their babies, couples capturing anniversaries, teens prepping for senior portraits. But soon something interesting happened. More and more women like me, started coming in. They weren't just looking for pretty pictures. They wanted something deeper. A way to reclaim space, to say I matter, to be seen truly and fully. I knew exactly how to give them that. One afternoon, a woman in her 50s sat down for her shoot. She clutched a worn photo album in her lap and said, "I've never liked a single photo of myself." We talked for almost an hour before I picked up the camera. When I finally showed her the first few shots, she covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. "Is that really me?" "Yes," I said. "That's the you the world forgot to notice." And in that moment, I realized something. I had become the person I once needed, someone who could make others feel seen, because I knew exactly what it felt like to be erased. I still don't talk to my family. Every now and then, I'll see a tagged photo of Vanessa on social media. She's still the center of every frame. Still shining. Still surrounded by a story where I never existed. But I don't flinch anymore. Because I'm not missing from the story, I just stopped letting them write it. The photos on my studio wall are filled with joy, complexity, vulnerability, power. They tell the truth. And in between all the client photos, there's one of me. Standing in the middle of my studio, camera in hand, smiling. Not for anyone else, but for myself. Not cropped, not blurred, not pushed to the edge. Centered. Framed. Exactly where I was meant to be.